I like to call myself a rewired engineer. I'm somebody who spent the first part of my career loving the clarity of the technical problems and creating things, right? Follow the data, solve the issue, move on. Clean, predictable. At least that's what I thought. And then I moved into leadership roles and suddenly things weren't so clear anymore, right? I went from designing systems to managing people, from logic to emotion. And what I realized painfully at times is that leadership isn't an extension of technical expertise. It's not good enough to be a really good engineer to be a really good CEO. It's a completely different game.
You're listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience, a podcast dedicated to helping executives train their sales and marketing teams to optimize growth. Whether you're looking for techniques and strategies or tools and resources, you've come to the right place. Let's accelerate your growth in 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. I'm your host, Cory, and today I have with me Pete Steege. He is a B2B marketing expert with more than 30 years experience across the tech and manufacturing landscape, from nimble 50-person startups in Silicon Valley all the way up to the world's largest Fortune 100 organizations. He's the founder and president of B2B Clarity, a marketing advisory firm that specializes in helping B2B tech companies, particularly those led by tech experts who found themselves suddenly in the CEO seat, gain clarity in their messaging, align their teams, and accelerate growth. His new book, Radical Clarity: How Accidental CEOs Uncover Meaning, Lead with Purpose, and Accelerate Growth, provides a roadmap for technical leaders ready to scale beyond their expertise and step into strategic leadership. Drawing from a toolbox of proven frameworks, Pete helps CEOs simplify complexity, sharpen decision-making, and transform both their businesses and themselves. Pete, welcome to the show.
Cory, so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this conversation. It kind of aligns with a lot of the things that we've been interested in recently, particularly that transition from technical expert to unleading a company. So I'm excited to learn more. But let's start with you, Pete. So, you've spent over 30 years helping B2B companies, startups, everyone grow. And now you're focused on guiding the quote unquote accidental CEO. But before, you actually started your career as an engineer. So what was that turning point that kind of led you to specialize in helping these more technical founders jump into a leadership role?
That's right, Cory. I like to call myself a rewired engineer. I'm somebody who spent the first part of my career loving the clarity of the technical problems and creating things, right? Follow the data, solve the issue, move on. Clean, predictable. At least that's what I thought. And then I moved into leadership roles and suddenly things weren't so clear anymore, right? I went from designing systems to managing people, from logic to emotion. And what I realized painfully at times is that leadership isn't an extension of technical expertise. It's not good enough to be a really good engineer to be a really good CEO. It's a completely different game. That shift, being good at that work but unprepared to lead it, is what I now call an accidental CEO, as you mentioned. And it's where so many brilliant founders and technical experts find themselves. They're building something amazing, and then suddenly they're the boss, and it's overwhelming. They're in back-to-back meetings, second-guessing decisions, stuck in the weeds, and unsure how to scale without burning out. And I've seen it in dozens of companies, startups, mid-sized firms, even some of the global giants that I've worked with. And I've been there myself. That's what led me to launch B2B Clarity and to write Radical Clarity. I wanted to give those leaders a new kind of playbook, not for managing, but for meaning. Because when you're clear on what matters, I found, you make better decisions, you lead with purpose, and build companies at scale without losing their soul. Today, I help accidental CEOs go from reactive to strategic, from winging it to leading with intention. And more than anything, I want them to see what I eventually saw. You don't have to be born a leader. You just need a better map.
I love it. There's so many bits in there I want to steal. And, I just think the last one I'll zero in on because, like you said, you don't have to be born a leader. You just need the map. I think there are so many things particularly when it comes to revenue leadership and leadership in general, right? We think of these skills like they're born salespeople, and it's not a skill that can be taught, but it is. It's not a black box. It's something you can dive into and something you can develop, just like leadership. And Pete, you mentioned that, you've gone from startups all the way to these massive, massive organizations. Were there a few pivotal moments that really shaped this leadership philosophy for you?
I'm going to share two. One was as I worked in these companies, so decades in the corporate world, right? Different companies, different industries. One thing that they almost all had in common was that they just got wrapped up in themselves, right? It was about, look at this thing we're making, look at this thing we can do. And almost all the energy, too much of the energy, was focused on sharing that kind of good news with people. That's a problem. That doesn't work. And we hopefully will get into that, what to do instead. And then the other thing is, in the last 5 years as a growth advisor for CEOs, I've seen another really common pattern. And that is that when I started my business, it was a marketing focused business, as you mentioned. But I've evolved over the last 5 years because I learned that marketing, turns out, that was the problem we started with, but it was really a symptom. It was a symptom of this bigger problem that I wrote Radical Clarity to deal with. This idea that if you're focused on all the things, you're soulless in a way, right? That's a little dramatic, but you're not giving them a reason to listen to you because there's no meaning, there's no why, right, in what you're telling them. So what I see is a lot of these CEOs, marketing was not the problem. It was a symptom of a deeper problem with this lack of understanding of what their truth was, and then building their company around that truth.
Help me understand a little bit more. I mean, I like it at first glance,
Sure.
right? It does resonate. But so when you talk about conveying the meaning and the truth behind it, I think I understand why every successful change management initiative really begins with the why. But talk to me more about like the purpose and why that is so grounding and necessary.
I believe that there's a really simple definition of business growth, business success. One word: relationships. For B2B at least. And what I mean by that is, in this crazy busy world that we all work in and live in, you have to decide to spend enough time to understand what this B2B company wants to help you problem, whatever it is that they want to tell you. If you don't have a reason, if there's not something that matters to you in your world, the meaning of it for you, then that's why we don't have our emails answered. That's why we get ghosted, right? It just goes right on by. It's in the noise. I believe that relationships happen because there's meaning identified between the two parties, which makes it worth it for them to attention to each other, right? And that meaning comes from what I call a business's true story. And that is the why. That is, we serve this specific kind of person or company, and what we do is this valuable thing for them. That's our purpose. And what it does for them is this, right? Those three things. That's the true story. And so often B2B companies, from the tiniest to the largest, are so busy with all the things that you add on to the story, they forgot to get the story right. And even if they have that truth, they've buried it under all this noise, right? So I find there's actually a lot more value with CEOs in taking things off the plate and doing less than like me coming and adding something to their plate. Usually the biggest return comes from us deciding how to reduce the noise in their business. And that's not just marketing. That's sales too, of course, but it's also product. Too many features, too many options, too many versions. It's true for your website. Too many acronyms, too many words on a page. It's true for your support. Too complex, right? It's all about, these days, reducing things, being simpler, and that's actually the way to break through.
I agree. I think that's fantastic advice because it's not only does it ring true, but it's so easy to lose sight of.
It's human nature. It's totally, think of, and even personal, like think of your Instagram streams or your TikTok, how addictive that is. It happens without thinking. It's frictionless. Well, almost every service that's there to help you be a better business has learned that if I make this really easy, maybe there's a free version to start, or it's just so easy to get started, right? The next thing you know, you turn around and you've just got too many plates spinning.
So now that we really kind of have a good understanding of the principle of this, how does this translate into growth? You mentioned kind of doing less, focusing more, but how does that become an actionable playbook that the CEOs can follow?
I can share some steps that I take usually with clients that really have shown to be very effective. It starts with that true story I spoke of. And we often work through a framework called the truth chain, which we go step by step and we identify who that really sharp target customer is. And I'll even go so far as to say, I don't use the term target customer. I call it a bullseye customer, because it's more than who we could sell it to. It's who, when they hear about it, says, oh my gosh, where have you guys been? I've been waiting for something like this, right? That's the customer that I found that you want to target your business at to be successful and to grow, right? So we find that. That's one end of what I call the truth chain. On the other end of the truth chain, the other link end, is your business. Why did we form this business? Why are we going through the pain it's taking to run this business, right? There's something there, and it's almost always related to those bullseye customers and what we want to do for them, right? When we have those two ends of that chain, then we work towards the middle in 3 steps to find the connecting point where we can take our story and turn it into the prospect story. So that's the first step of growth, that issue of traction and just having people hear the message. What not to do is to turn up the volume and just make more noise. What the better thing to do is translate your story into exactly what they're thinking about. And what they're thinking about is the top burning issues in their business that you can help them with. So that's the next link towards the center from them. On your side, the next link is, what's our superpowers? What is it that makes us special and unique in our ability to help these people, right? So it's not always product things. It could be, but it could be your people. It could be your systems, right? It could be where you're located. Who knows, right? But there's probably 3 things. Often there's 3 things that together make you the only one that can solve the problem in the way you solve it, right? So now you're poised for that final link that connects the chain, and that is how we can help you. And when you start with that message, rather than, let me tell you about this thing we make, when you start with, let me tell you how I can help you with that problem, that's the door that is open for you. And that's the one they have that's enough reason, enough meaning that's directly relatable to them that you're going to get in the door. You're going to get some traction. And you'll have time then to explain more about how you do it and what that means, right? So that's the first step, is that what I call the true story. And that is the core of growth, in my opinion. From there, it's often the next step is, how do we take that nugget of truth and inject it into our business and infect our customers with it? So that's your marketing program. That's your sales system. That's your product offers. It's the things you're going to do and the places you're going to do them to share that true story with those people. And I mentioned injecting it in your team. That's really important too, Cory. I found that CEOs, growth, right behind growth is the biggest need they have, is leadership, right? Their first time, they're an accidental CEO. They didn't grow up learning how to lead people often, right? And so that's a missing piece. That true story also can align your team and get everybody on board with something. And it doesn't have to be about you and your charismatic nature. It can be about the power of and the meaning of that message, right? So just to kind of summarize that, it's find the core first, step away from all the stuff, find the core. And then once you really got that, it's a matter of helping that core expand like ripples in a pond, right? Through your team, through your market. And that's the simple way to take that relationship engine and make it work for you.
I think that's excellent advice. And I want to dig into it a little bit more. Particularly, I have 2 examples kind of floating in my mind here, Pete. I have one where, there's a startup, maybe, they already got funding coming in, right? They've got investors, there's pressure mounting to make things happen. On the other side of the coin, maybe you've got a technical founder that's, just maybe a little bit of investment here and there, but mainly has kind of saved up, know that they have maybe a year and a half to get this thing up and running, or they're going to have to go back and look for a job. I'm thinking if I'm either of them, I'm going to listen to your advice, say, this is fantastic. However, I do need to grow at all costs, right? So I imagine it would be very hard to, put that advice immediately into context with all of this pressure coming at you from the other side. So how do you work with people in those positions to really make them see that it's not more noise? You can't just get more customers by throwing more features and functionality at the wall. How do you help them really focus and believe in this approach?
That's a great question. It's absolutely correct. I found that a couple things make this possible. One is when I start working with CEOs, they aren't just getting started. They've tried maybe 2 or 3 or 4 times to grow. They tried this campaign. They tried this idea. They did these things. And here they are, and they're still stuck, right? So they see the clock ticking, but it's pretty easy to convince them. I don't have to convince them. They know that activity alone doesn't solution because they've been trying that and it hasn't worked. And the fact they're working with me says, wow, we got to try something else because that didn't work, right? So that's the first thing. And then when we work together, the good news is that true story is pretty much the first thing we do after an assessment. So pretty early on, within a month or 2 of working together, we have this aha moment where we come upon their truth, right? And it's 3 words or 5 words. And everybody around the table says, oh my gosh, that's us. That's what we do. And that is a mountaintop moment. And that inspires the CEO, maybe gives them hope too, right? That says, we didn't have this, or we didn't know this. We hadn't uncovered it before, right? So they get that early win, and that can put the wind in the sails of the next 6 to 12 months to then be patient and do the work and, turn the volume down on all the stuff and pick a few things and really lean into them because they're inspired by this simple idea that tells their value story.
I want to switch gears just a little bit and focus back on leadership because we've been circling it for a while, it seems. Going back to our new technical founder into the CEO role example, I think anyone out there who's led a team of any size, whether it is 3 people or 300 people, quickly realizes that bottlenecks happen at the top. And I think it is particularly bad when you have a founder who's in the CEO role because it's their baby, right? They've got so much riding on it. They are a lot of the times the subject matter expert and everything. So it's natural that they would step into that role, and also kind of detrimental. So how do you help leaders navigate that challenge?
I like to look at that leadership. That challenge is so real, the bottleneck challenge. I like to look at that as a decision-making problem. Here's what I mean. I think when they first start, they're making, let's say 99% of the decisions, right? It's their deal and they're deciding, and that's their job, and they need to. As it grows, as they add people, more and more, first there's more decisions and they're more consequential decisions. So some of them take more time. And that's where the bottleneck happens, is that you as the decider aren't deciding, right? And people are waiting to know what to do. And I've seen the way I work with CEOs is on something I call the impact matrix. And it's based on the idea that there are 2 dimensions to decision-making for a CEO. One is centralized or decentralized. Are they all being made by me or one person, or are they being made wherever, right? Am I letting everybody make the decisions? That's one axis. And the other axis is how empowered are the people on my team? Do they feel like they have the ability and the permission to make decisions, right? Well, those 2 dimensions lead to, there's 3 of those squares that don't work when you scale, and there's one you want to strive for. So first, if they're not empowered and you are keeping all the decisions, they're centralized, well, that's them being dependent on you, right? They're just waiting. And then the bottleneck happens and everything stalls, right? It's paralyzed. Another option is to say, well, you know what? The problem is I'm the bottleneck. So I'm just going to say, guys, you know what's best, you decide. And if you do that and you empower them, well, you get chaos because everybody's making decisions and they're stepping all over each other, right? And there's no unity to it. So you do need some control. What I've found is the sweet spot is you say, you know what, one person's going to make all the decisions, but they're not always going to be my decisions. So you work with your leadership team and you say, you are accountable for this. And I'm going to totally trust you because we're going to hold you accountable for that decision. And you spread those decisions that don't have to be made by you, but they're responsible for the results. They're like mini CEOs, right? And that's the combination where you get the empowered benefits, you get the quick or actionable decisions, and you still have accountability. So that's been a really key way to address that really difficult challenge of how do you scale decision-making and not slow your business down.
I think that's a great blended approach. And P, I'm curious to get your take on this because I've seen this happen, that CEOs that have the best intentions and, will actually end up in that third box, right? Like where they want to be. And they're going, and for some reason, whether it's, overwhelm, whether it's uncharted territory, they tend to step out of the CEO role and kind of immediately retreat to where they're comfortable, right? If it's a technical founder, right, instead of making high-level business decisions, they're going to retreat they're going to play with the product. They're going to play with the code. How do you help them sort of identify that they're doing that and kind of make them comfortable moving away and having a very different job now?
So part of it is look in the mirror situation. It's just being the one that can point that out to them. That alone helps a lot, right? Because often they get in their own heads and they don't even know that they're doing it because it's muscle memory. I think beyond that, a really effective way to address that is back to that true story. If you start with that really, really good core, that the trick is to go back to that every day. Why am I here? What are we off to do? And the answer is going to be when you do that and you think about the purpose and the value and where you want to go with this business, part of that answer is I can't be the technical guy anymore. I have these other things that I have to do to get us there, right? And so that helps with that issue, but it also helps with your team, your leadership team, coming back to them often and saying in the product review, hey, does this product take us further on our path to being what we want to be, right? The reviews of the messaging, the reviews of everything you do. The more it's simple, it sounds simple, but it really is effective to just keep tied to the truth of why you're doing this. Because when that happens, when you go technical, you maybe got stressed, but you forgot who you are and what you're doing. So it's an awareness thing, I believe.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And I think for those people that are lucky enough to have a Pete, right, that can direct them to have a hard look at themselves in the mirror, like you said, that makes sense. It's going to work. What would you say to maybe first year founders that don't have a Pete yet in their lives and are trying to develop that self-awareness? Where should they look for these bottlenecks that, a lot of people don't see developing?
I think that the key, back to the simplicity thing, right? I think the key is you need to be focused on, I'd say at max 3 major initiatives in your business at any one time. And some CEOs listening out there say, are you kidding me? There's no way I can choose just 3. But the power of 80-20 is real. And I believe if you're a CEO and you really honestly look at your business, I would guess that for your business, less than half of the projects that are on your team's plates today are not succeeding, or they're not delivering what you invested in them, expecting them to do. And I believe that, so success comes from not trying to do more on those things. Success comes from finishing and doing things that are important and following them through. So I think to answer your question, you don't need a Pete to take a hard look at your business and what you're doing today because you're in it. You know it more than anyone else. And I would challenge you to come up with the 3 most important, and then which is the most important of those 3, and make sure that you're spending 80% of your time on those 3 things. all the way through to the results that you expect from them.
I like it a lot. Three things, though. Yeah, like you said, it's going to be hard for people to wrap their mind around. And I think it goes back to actually, Pete, what we started the conversation with, and what appears to be, at least to me, is a kind of central theme of your book, Radical Clarity, which is relationships. So how does that kind of play into this conversation we're having, and how should CEOs and founders, rethink what their jobs are essentially based on this one word, this one ideal, relationships?
I would love to give you an even simpler view of what to do of the whole thing. And that is, it's a two-step dance that's focused on relationships. Step one, find your truth. We've talked about that. And step two, get out of the way. If we as a business truly have something that we believe is valuable to our target audience, which of course you do, that's why you're doing it. If that's true, then the only thing stopping you from creating the relationships is the things that are blocking. It's the lack of putting your brand in front of them. It's the complexity of the demo process. It's the confusing language that you're using. It's the difficult process to, whatever it might be. It's even product operation, right? How does it work? How can we make it easier? I think flipping the script, and rather than thinking about what do we need to do to create a relationship, trust that the valuable relationship is there to be had based on the value you can give them. What do we need to do to just expose that to them? It's like gravity. It's get out of the way, right? I just think that's an easy, some might say oversimple, but it's really true. So much of what your business is doing is getting in the way of the good stuff, right? And I think that's the best way to address your question. That those relationships come from shared value, and that comes when you get out of the way of your truth.
I love it. And for CEOs and founders out there that are listening to this right now, and at home, right, nodding their heads along while they're walking the dog, doing the dishes, whatever they're doing, where should they start? If you had to give, one piece of advice, like stop listening to this podcast, go look at your business, get out of the way, focus on the core of what really matters. What's the first sort of rock they should turn over?
Sit down in a quiet space and answer 3 questions. Who is my bullseye customer? What are we in the world to do? And how does that bullseye customer benefit from that? You're over halfway to your true story at that point. And I think from that 30-minute exercise, you'd be a really good starting place.
That's phenomenal advice. Okay. Pete, as we move toward the end of the podcast, there are 2 questions that we ask every guest. And the first is, we're recording this in May of 2025. So let's jump ahead 5 years out, looking at 2030. What is one big shift coming for, B2B tech companies, this sort of startup founder, technical founder, that not a lot of people are talking about right now?
So a lot of people are talking about AI, but I want to talk about it in maybe a different way than I hear people talking about it. In 5 years, marketing as we know it will no longer exist. And CEOs that figure out best what the next marketing is are the ones that are going to be ahead. When I say marketing's not going to work, what I mean is the content flood, which has started, is going to continue. The abstraction wall will continue to grow. That's AI summarizing all the stuff in my inbox and AI aggregating things I'm sending out as well. All of that means that our current model of how we connect, how we communicate won't exist. And what is taking its place is not clear, but that I think is the biggest takeaway is start now. If you're not learning AI, getting AI literate, that's going to be the first step whenever you get started. So you should start now. And then that will make you more equipped to address a future that is really hard to predict.
I agree. As a marketer, it terrifies me, but I agree, right? I wonder what I'm going to be doing in 5 years, like maybe sending out zines. I hope so. Maybe I'll just send out snail mail zines. I hope that's the future. That'd make me happy, but we'll
I like
see.
it. You know what? There's something to that, Cory, because I think the counter result to this, communications required, right? We need to connect, engage relationships, right? It's important. It's just all these electronic ways aren't going to work like they did in the past. So something, maybe it's zines, but something's going to take its place.
Maybe so. We'll see. Okay. And then our final question, Pete, is looking back on your own journey and career path, if you could go back 5, 10, maybe even 15 years and give advice to your younger self, what would it be and why?
I would say, listen to yourself, Pete. Take a chance on what you really want to do. I think I had a great career in corporate for a long time, and I really wouldn't change all the things I learned. But this last 5 years, when I took a chance and started my own business, has been just such a treat, such a joy for me. And I just would encourage myself to take chances like that.
That's inspiring. That's great advice. All right. Well, Pete, thanks so much. This has been a fascinating conversation. If people want to learn more about you, maybe pick up the book, where should they go?
Well, I've created a landing page just for your listeners. It's at B2B-Clarity/revenue. And they can go there, and I have some bonus resources for them, including there'll be an easy way for them to get the book and excerpts from the book. But I'll also have worksheets on some of these ideas that we talked about that are free for them to use.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for setting that up. I'm going to go check it out, and I will definitely, our listeners should as well.
Great.
All right. Thanks again, Pete.
Thank you, Cory.
You've been listening to the B2B Revenue Executive Experience. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in iTunes or your favorite podcast player. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.